when I asked this question yesterday, there was quite a few people who put their hands up, and when I said how many people have finished a game, quite a lot of people put their hands down. And one of the big things about designing board games is getting something finished to the point where it can be played by other people. So in my mind, that's really when you can say you've designed a board game, is when you can actually hand it over to somebody else, and you're not there telling them how to play it, and they're not there scratching their heads, and you've actually probably thrown away about 90%, if not 99% of your ideas, and then started again. So my name's Dr. Mike Reddy. I teach game design at the University of South Wales, so if any of you want to know how you can get a career doing that kind of thing, maybe chat to me later. In the meantime, I think you also want to hear from our two guests here. We were supposed to have a third who might turn up, but I think we'll just start with the two we've got. So, gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves, and what do you do, and how do you know about board game design?
Well, okay, yeah, all right. So my name's Henry Jasper. I'm the guy behind Grubbling Games. We've got last year we released a board game on Kickstarter called Cornish Smuggler, which is all about smuggling in Cornwall, as you can probably guess. So that's that kind of side of it. And the other side that I know about game design is through the publisher side, because we're also the publisher. So this year we have another game on Kickstarter, which is called Waggle Dance. So we like naming games after beers. That's not a game which I've designed, but it's a game which we've taken through the whole publishing kind of side of things. So from origination through component costing and the play testing and obviously the marketing side of it. So I would say that's kind of my background.
Okay, Andy?
My name's Tony Boydell. I designed Ivor the Engine board game that we've got at the show this year. You might also know me from Snowdonia, which was a lot of fun to do and sort of brought me some really nice fringe benefits a couple of years ago when Lookout Games co-published it as well, so that was fantastic.
So a bit of a Welsh feel here.
Well, yeah, train themes, Wales themes, it's just the way it goes sometimes. I didn't plan it that way, but yeah, I've been involved in Surprise Stare games for about 12 years now, and it's just sort of a small group of us, two husband and wife teams together, designing games, developing them, doing the graphics, all that kind of stuff. So this is, I think, our 12th year of publishing games. We usually do one a year.
In case you were wondering, just Surprise Stare is this, rather than, oh, oh, oh. It's the stares instead. And they've got a lovely logo as well, which is somebody going higher. Okay, so without further ado, I think probably the first thing to do is to have a little bit of a discussion about how you approach designing games. And please feel free to kind of chip in, raise your hands, and I'll keep my eyes out for you. And then towards the end of the seminar, we'll then open it up to questions and case studies and issues that people have. So do you get mental blocks? How do you proceed to the next stage? How do you start? How do you get your ideas? So in that light, you design games. Mm-hmm. So what's your methodology starting from getting the idea?
Yeah, okay. So the way that kind of approach game design is iterative. I think everyone's kind of the same really with this. So it kind of goes through, there's a cycle that kind of goes through from kind of mechanics, is it interesting, is it cute, is it smart enough, that kind of thing, to accessibility, is it actually playable enough, can people actually kind of take it and then go with it themselves. And then the other side of it is the costing side. So can we do this? Is it actually possible? And if we can do it, how can we do it better? And how can we make it more interesting? So kind of going through that kind of cycle and working in that way. The other kind of, that's kind of a very insular kind of way to look at things because it's just you. So the other kind of bit of it is it needs to kind of encompass a lot of people. So this is kind of the playtesting side of things. And with the playtesting, that's probably the thing that I've learned most about with game design, I would say, in terms of how to go about that. So with Cornish Smuggler, we're playtesting that, we got a huge amount of people, like loads and loads of people, and we just gave it to them and said, break it. And that was great. That's kind of a nice approach. That's also kind of cute. But it's kind of not necessarily the most productive way to go about things. So I think what I've learned is to actually make that as specific as possible. So with Waggle Dance, it's like uber specific, our play testing. We're sending it out and saying, we want you to, that bit there, give feedback on that, and that bit there. So as well as the general stuff, we're also kind of really kind of homing in and focusing and making that so that it appeals to the, appeals to kind of the market that we're kind of planning to sell it at, I would say.
Okay, so can you remember back to the early days of game design?
Well, it isn't really early days because every game starts in the early days, and once you get into, I mean, I'm always thinking about new game designs, so it's there's always something at the very first stages. But I tend to start off either with the theme, or I've seen something else and thought that's really interesting. Can I do something with that kind of basic idea? But most of the time, for me, it's the theme. I'll come across something. So when I thought about Snowdon Mountain Railway, that was such a captivating theme, and it was such an odd theme compared to regular railway games that were all around at the time. They're all Age of Steam clones, and there was lots of cube shifting and top-hatted share dealing type shenanigans. And I wanted something that was a little bit more personal, a little bit more actually physically in the mud, if you like, doing the digging. So the theme started that process off. It's quite interesting you bring this up, because this year my erstwhile partner Alan Paul is moving house, and he found the very first prototype we did of Snowdonia in his garage, and it's a completely different game. And what happened is I gave it to him and said, look, I've done all this, I want you to look at this and come back to me. And he forgot about it, put it in his garage. And then 2 years later I just came back to it and did a reboot. And that's what I'll often do with game designs. I don't really see how you can get the game from sort of beginning to end in a really short time. It's not something I find I can rush, because I have a little sort of meter inside me that sort of goes on to yes plus when I feel the game is absolutely right. And there's a whole variety of things you do. You develop, you redevelop, you do loads of play testing. Sometimes you get to all this play testing and everyone's going, yeah, this is great, Tony, this is really great, but something inside you is going, no, it's not great for me yet. So the journeys are all pretty much the same for me, and they're all pretty extended, sort of, an average of sort of 4 or 5 years. So if you want to make a career of doing game design, you need to start one now, start another one next year, start another one a year after that, and then they'll all start paying off in about 5 years' time.
Yeah, okay. Well, so do you have a notebook that you keep?
Yeah, I have loads of notebooks.
Yeah.
I did a lot of travelling for work on trains, and so you just sit looking out the windows and then just make notes about stuff.
Yeah, I know when I've got game designs, I kind of have to get them out of my head, because you can't stop thinking about them. And the difficulty is if they stay in your head, then they're perfect. Because no one's ever challenged them. Yeah, it'll just be fantastic.
Has anyone here had the idea, and you've sat down, you got your pen, you got your cup of coffee, you got your biscuits, you got your pad, and you start doing a card, and you do a little bit of a labelling business, and then you stop, and it's, right, I'll go and watch the telly instead. So something that you were really excited about, you start actually manifesting it, and you just think, no. And all the enthusiasm drains away from you. Yeah. But at least you've kind of got that out of your system.
Absolutely, yeah, you've got it out, and sometimes it can then raise all those questions, because when it is in your head, it's not a game, it's not a design, because there's lots of questions that you haven't answered yet that other people are going to ask straight away, like, what am I supposed to do? Or what's the goal? Or how do I win? Or is there a broken strategy? All these different questions that we have. I can talk about some of my ideas later on, but obviously I want to focus particularly on you. Do you have a notebook that you put things in, or are you
like Tony, I have a number of notebooks.
Is it paper and pen?
So I have one for in the car, I have one for in the office.
Oh wow! Okay.
I have one which I carry around with me. And what I'd really like is to have the kind of Star Trek kind of notepad where you can actually write on things, and that would kind of maybe be everything. But at the moment, there's something about kind of having it on paper and being able to scribble over things and rip things out, and also have it as an archive. So you can go back through it. So like you were saying about the reboot kind of thing, yeah, I totally get that, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my design notebook in my bag. I never go anywhere without it. I may pull it out a bit later if people are interested. But and one of the things I find is, I kind of write down ideas. I might write a one page trying to get out this thing that's in my head, that's the mechanic or the feeling I want players to be able to have, or even just the theme. I'd love to do an idea about this. 2 lovers, one's chasing the other one. So, but that person's not interested, they want to chase somebody else. So how do you get them to turn around so that you maybe meet up? Or do you going to pursue them forever, or are you going to realise it's not possible and then go the other way? So there's a game, that's the only bit of that game I've got, which is the idea of pursuing somebody or maybe giving up and changing direction. And then when you change direction, maybe they suddenly realise actually they quite like you, so you maybe entice them back.
I think you'll find that any game that involves pursuit ends up being a zombie game. So,
well, at the moment it's a romantic game.
Keep it, retheme it, because there's a lot of money.
Okay, sort of brains. Well, maybe I'll do that. But so there's some ideas that it's as general and as vague as that, and you put them down and you hope that you'll go back to them. And then there's others in my notebook. I've got 2-3 pages, and then I've got like 3 or 4 other games, and I've got another page on that first game, and I keep flicking backwards and forwards again. So they kind of build up and they're quite hectic. And people have said, why don't you make them digital? And I said, but part of it is actually you can read this in the bath without worrying about dropping it in, because you can maybe dry it on a radiator, but you can get them anywhere and the battery never runs out. And there's actually something about pen and paper, isn't there?
There's just something about it, and it's kind of so there's something about stationery, and there's something about the act of actually writing it out physically and being able to kind of re-edit but kind of not delete, and it's not as clean, it needs to be messy. There is something about that.
But obviously part of that is just getting loads of ideas out. Now I try and do at least one a month, to the point where I think I could probably hand it to somebody else, and I imagine it may be a little bit slower for you.
It's very, very
commercial is very different.
It all depends. If I might walk into a room and see something, a poster, and think, oh great, that'd be fantastic, and it just. I mean, for instance, a few years back, I went to Essen and I saw the game String Railway, and I thought that's absolute genius, really. Have people know String Railway? Really wonderful game. And I really enjoyed playing it, but I thought, I don't like being limited to 4 short strings and 1 long string. Yeah. I want to be able to decide how long my string is going to be. And anyone who's ever worked in an office has played with paper clips, and you make chains of paper clips. So I ended up doing paperclip railways based on that one point of inspiration. The game is nothing like String Railways, just in case anybody hasn't read my massive retraction and sort of debate about why it's nothing like it, because a few Americans accused me of copying it. But it's one of those things, you get to see one thing and it just carries you off in a completely different direction. And you almost have no control, it's driving itself. Yeah. But that's quite a rare thing.
Yeah. When I teach game design, we actually do a workshop with our first year students where they actually do a 15-minute prototype. So if they have the idea, make a prototype using post-it notes and paper and whatever they've got in 15 minutes and then start playtesting it. I've never yet had a student not come up with a game in 15 minutes. A lot of them are quite derivative, but what we often say when people are stuck is take a game you like and take something away, or a game you hate and take something away or add something to it, like Monopoly without the money. How can we make Monopoly work without the money? So that's the important thing for you to do, is to kind of churn out ideas, because as I said at the beginning, most ideas are ideas that aren't very good. Or when you actually get to the stage where you've got something playable, it's not fun. Mm-hmm. So how do you go about weeding out ideas? How do you go about trying to find the one to develop further?
Yeah, okay, well that's a good question actually. So I think so in terms of kind of like getting ideas down and working in that sense, because you've got this archive and you can work through that. So what we did last year, so over Christmas, and I think a couple of other kind of publishing companies do this, is we get all the good ideas that we have, games that we have which are kind of like a state which isn't ready for release, but it's good to be played with, and we just give them to people and they all get played in a big kind of game jam. So we did this at the New Year, we took 2 weeks off, and we just had loads of friends around in the house and just played loads of games, and then at the end of that kind of thought, well, what kind of works with that? From the publishing side, it's all about theme, and it's all about marketing, because it needs to be able to sell. Because without that, it's great having a game which will work in the most novel way and all this kind of thing, but if it doesn't capture people's imagination, then it's not really going to go anywhere. Because we're tiny, and our model at the moment is Kickstarter. It also needs to be very visual and needs to kind of be able to capture that kind of side of things. So at the moment, I would say that's where we're at. But at the point we are able to move away from that and move into a different model, then it will change. But for the moment, that's where we're at. Okay.
So obviously, we can be inspired by other games. I mean, obviously, we had the String Railway, and people can accuse you of copying and cheating. There is no ability to copyright or control a mechanism. So if there's a game that has a mechanism that you like, there's not necessarily anything wrong in using that as a starting point, so long as in my opinion anyway, you add something to it that makes it better. So the classic example is Dominion, which in many respects is the very first deck building game. And there have been other deck building games that have come out. My own personal criticism of Dominion is that why does a village mean that I have +1 action and +1 coin to spend? And the card village doesn't really imply to me that there's a mechanic with this kind of theme pasted over the top. Not necessarily criticise it, because I do love the game, but obviously you've had some criticism of people saying that you've copied their games.
Well, it's not the people who've made the original games. It's the other people on Board Game Geek. You know, I've had a few abusive emails saying, "How dare you rip off this guy's work?" Well, the first person I saw at Essen that year was Hisashi Hayashi, and and told him what my idea was, and the following year I gave him some copies of the game. So he's got absolutely no problem with it. It's just there's a few people who just like picking a fight, which is no surprise if anyone's ever spent any time on Board Game Geek whatsoever. Yeah. Or the internet in general, exactly.
Yes. There's a lovely XKCD cartoon which is, I've got to stay up all night. Someone on the internet is wrong. But going on from those, do you throw away a lot of the ideas? You said about doing a game
Nothing ever
jam.
gets thrown away, ever.
Do you discard them for further development, but keep bits?
Compartmentalised into a different place,
right.
I would say, and different bits. So like kind of different, the kind of original kind of like the seed idea, the thing which kind of really grasped, that might not even go into that format. That might even turn into like a live game or a role play game or something, or maybe just some kind of cute party game we're doing for a party. Yeah.
How often do you go back to your discard pile?
Not often enough, I would probably say. It's really easy to get caught up in other things, and for the kind of like juggernaut of momentum, because to kind of take over. So it's kind of like I know that kind of like I'm looking after myself if I'm reading. So if I read a little bit each kind of day, then I know that I'm looking after myself. If I don't, then I know that I'm working too much and that kind of thing. With that kind of reflective side, that's kind of past that as well. So I should probably be a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more rigid about it. So it's kind of like on this day, okay, we need to now go back and look, but I don't. It's kind of as in my head. Yeah.
Everything gets archived to some extent. I have archived stuff on the bonfire as well. If I've really disgusted with it, but I mean, my big example of that is this year I have the game Over the Engine, but that is actually based on one of my first ever board game designs, which is about going around the planet Earth, clearing up pollution from the planet Earth, and then putting animals back into their natural habitats. Right. And that was a game I developed before I played lots of Euro games, before I really got into games design more seriously and playing all the games that I do. And I played a lot of games in the last 10 years. So there's a naivety about it which is perfect for something like Over the Engine, where you don't want a game that's far more complicated for the theme. It's got to be designed to be a family game. It's got to have all that lovely theme and artwork, and it has to be a playable game. It mustn't be like, question 5, what did Ivor do on the 14th of March 1964? It's not a trivia game. It's got to be something that is engaging as well.
Is that the one with the elephant?
Well, the game doesn't have the elephant, but the cards do have elephants on them. Yes, Alice the Elephant.
Okay.
I'm sure there's a lot of people here who know all about Alice the Elephant and what happens to her, bless her. But it's so some stuff does come back, because when I was given the opportunity to do an Ivor board game, first thing I did is try and find all the things I did before I was clouded by this more complicated world that I live in now. So, and that was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. North Wales is now full of sheep, needs to be cleared away so you can do the work.
North Wales is full of sheep. This is a stereotype. It's probably true. To answer your question for myself, this is my latest board game ideas book, and what I do every so often is I just leaf through it to remind myself of what I've been doing, and something I've left for ages, maybe go back to again. So it is important to keep all these things. You've heard it here from 3 people: hoard everything, never throw anything away, particularly boxes for games and so on.
Archiving is super hot also, so yeah.
Okay, so we've got our idea. We started to kind of mash it out. Do you kind of do paper prototypes, kind of very quick scribbles on cards?
I'm ridiculous. I'll sit down and mock up something almost like a final version using library art from the web and do iconization to try and make it as simple as possible. And then I'll play it once and go, that's awful, and consign it to the bonfire archive. And it's a ridiculous amount of wasted time. But that's just the way I am. But then it's a lot easier to do now. I mean, I think there's no real excuse nowadays, especially if you're passing the game out to other people to get an independent view, to not make it look like a really presentable game. Sending out little envelopes and lined post-it cards and stuff with handwritten stuff on, it's not acceptable anymore, because you're going to get a bad response from your playtest group straight off. Yeah. You want me to play this game that I've never played before, but I can't even read what I'm supposed to do in the game. Yeah. So I think you do need to get used to that idea of presenting, because it helps distill your ideas anyway. Yeah. If you start laying something out, you think, well, that doesn't work, and oh, hang on a sec, that mechanic, that could be better if I did it this way. So you get almost like little trigger sparks of inspiration from just the mechanics of building something that you can start playing with.
I'd like to take that a bit further, actually, because I think you're exactly right. Because if you think about your game, it's not just the mechanic; it's how it's played as well, and how people interact with it. So if you're giving just like a big block of text and that's the game, there you go. And it's really hard to interpret. People don't all learn in that way, and they're going to get distracted from the game. They're going to get distracted by interpreting the game. So their kind of impact of the game is going to be skewed. Basically, you're not giving a fair representation. And also, it distills your ideas. So you can look at something and also things, not just on the computer, but when you print it out, it can look different. You can just go, actually, no, that doesn't work at all. That's not what I want at all. So good things to learn. I mean, like kind of learning how to use InDesign, really, really powerful. I would say probably the most powerful kind of game design tool that I've found, because it allows you to formulate these things and also to create very quickly prototypes which kind of not look pro, but kind of look enough like what it's actually going to be that it doesn't distract people, because they have to interpret it.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember if you're going to use art off the internet is to make sure it's the royalty-free stuff, isn't it, or clip art. Obviously, in theory, if you're just putting something out for playtesting, then if you've used a copyright image, isn't necessarily an issue. Obviously, there would be if you were going to then release it commercially, but it's probably a better idea to actually use free of licensing kind of images if you can. And also be wary sometimes, because clip art that you get in something like PowerPoint might be fine for you to use inside PowerPoint presentations, but if you read the fine print, it might not be used in any other context. So sometimes you'll have graphics. I mean, I had the issue myself when I've got graphics, and we've had a graphic artist to come in to actually design graphics for us. You've got to be really clear who owns the IP. If you're wanting to own the IP and have exclusive use of that art, you'll probably have to pay more to the artist. Rather than licensing it. If they do license it to you, then it might be only for that specific use. So if you license it for using on a card and then you put it all over your promotional material on your website, they'll suddenly say, you didn't license it for that purpose. Yes?
Talking about IP, how important is new IP? I mean, there's a lot of games coming out at the moment that are using old, sort of familiar IP, so even with Ivor the Engine, it's something that everybody knows. Is that important that they already have a foothold in the game by knowing it, or is it very important to have something new and interesting, or is there pluses and minuses?
I suppose there's a distinction between licensing, so like the Batman game, or and the idea of representation. So there's kind of two questions there, because licensing will sell games. Games related to movies will sell games. That doesn't necessarily mean they're very good. Often because the licensing amount of money is just taken half the budget, if not more. I mean, we all know about the E.T. game console. They spent $50 million getting the license for E.T., and there's no way they were going to make the money back from that. And the game was done in 5 weeks. So no wonder it was a very good video game. So licensing against bespoke and new art, and then the idea of IPs having something new, rather than something that's based on old games.
It's about what you want. I mean, there's a personal element. I'm not just going to design games that I don't like to play and that I don't want to see out there. I mean, my name's going to go on the box. Thankfully, the European games tradition of the author gets their name on the box is great, because you can start, get your name out there. But I don't want my name against something I haven't got any belief in. The Ivor stuff just comes from that's how I grew up. I lived with Ivor and all the small film stuff when I was young. I read all the books, I showed all the films to my kids. And when the opportunity came up to do a license for it, my first thought was, it's got to be about the artwork. The game has to be playable, it has to be an enjoyable family game, but everything about it has to be to do with the artwork. Yeah. I don't want to get somebody else to do new pictures for it. I don't want somebody else contributing to that world. And there's other little details as well. There are no other trains in the game apart from Ivor, so you don't have little train pieces when you move around the board, you have little wagons, because there is only one train in Ivor the Engine. Yeah. I was very lucky to be given the chance to actually go and speak to Peter Firmin, the only surviving member of the Small Films Partnership, to talk about the game and ask him if he would be willing to do some more artwork, and he said yes. And that made me even more determined that actually the most important names on that box, and nothing to do with me or Surprise Stare, it's Ivor the Engine and it's Peter Firmin and Small Films. Yeah. Because I'm so in love with that, I'm so indebted to that. Everything I do with that game is to make it the best possible game that can possibly be.
To honour the original.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because I'm a big fan of Oliver Postgate's work as well. I mean, Bagpuss is one of my
Well, everyone knows, I think, the Clangers are coming out again next year. You know, so I mean, as a sort of to get these guys speaking a little bit, I just wondered if you were given the chance to design a clangers game. I mean, maybe you could all offer some suggestions. What mechanics would you use? What things would you want to see in the game? Just sort of maybe soup.
Soup clanging.
Soup in there. And anything? What else would you do with a clangers game? Just let's have a few. Blue string pudding. You see, you got to have blue string pudding.
The little trolleys that they move around in there.
Dustbin lids.
Dustbin lids.
Yeah. The bird, the lovely mechanical bird as well.
The Iron Chicken.
Oh.
Is the Iron Chicken evil, or is the Iron
No, the Iron Chicken was lovely. There's nothing evil about anything to do with post-game film.
No.
have to be?
No one's mentioned the moon.
Yeah.
The board seems to be, would be logically to be the moon. But if you think about the clangers' moon, they would often do things in a sort of MC Escher type way. They would walk sideways and upside down into walls and come out vertically, and so that kind of suggests maybe we need a moon as the board, but maybe it ought to be some kind of 3D moon. Yeah.
Yeah. Or
So,
maybe a hollow representation.
Exactly.
Of it.
So very quickly, as you start taking the theme as your inspiration, there's a lot of things you can then, basic ideas, basic story elements that lead themselves to standard mechanics. So this goes back to fundamental game design. If you want to design games, you should be playing games. Because you get a mental library then of all the great different techniques that people have used and say, that would be perfect.
Yeah.
You know, deck building would be great for that.
And one of the nice things about Board Game Geek, because there are a few nice things about Board Game Geek, is the way that they categorise games by game mechanics. So I wanted to do a dice bank game. We have kind of a bank of dice and you have to use them out, and I kind of came up with a prototype for a starship combat game using dice banking. Now I'm telling you this, and you can all go away and do it, but actually that's absolutely fine because ideas are 10 a penny. You know, so new IP is a good thing. There is a bit of a dichotomy sometimes though, because if a game is completely new, it's very hard for someone to understand how to approach it. If a game is 99% as another game, it does feel like a reskin, doesn't it? And there is a combination of, there's a continuum between almost a perfect clone. I think I saw there's a lovely card game called Aquarius, which I play a lot with my family, where you've got to lay down cards and match them next with the same images, and you have to build up a line of 7. Well, they've got a re-thing which is with dragons on it, that my wife said, this is Aquarius, but we re-thing with dragons. And I said, well, oh. And she said, yeah, double O, because they move a card from here to here card as a scantily clad woman. So all of a sudden, something that was very kind of 60s, 70s art style is exactly the same game with new art on it. And now it's actually really not something that I would probably want to bring to my family to play with, because why would they just put a scantily clad woman in a card that's about dragons? So who knows? Anyway, but the question you had about new IP links up to something that you had about novelty. Because if you have a game that's too different in a mechanic, that can be difficult, can't it, for somebody to grasp the idea of.
Yeah, it can be. I think so in terms of IP, sorry, hello. So in terms of IP, it is, so you were saying, it's not, your IP is your goals, because that's what you have, and that's essentially the rules. It's not the mechanics, because you can't IP mechanics. And so that's kind of the side to kind of like hang on to. In terms of game design and game evolution, what's happening with games? So evolution kind of, it's not like a standard linear thing, it's a non-linear thing. So it'll kind of jump up, and so something new will happen. And then everyone else will think of all these different ways that you can kind of use that. So it's not being derivative, it's kind of being able to improve on and work upon, and all of that then goes to the next leap and the next leap and the next leap. So in terms of IP and that kind of side of things, I wouldn't focus on mechanics at all. I would just focus on what you're trying to say with the game. So this can be the theme, this can be the feel. So with Smuggler, we really wanted to make a game which, sorry I say we because there's loads of people involved with it, this is the whole process. So we really wanted to make a game which actually said something about us and who we were and where we're coming from, what we're doing, which is being from Cornwall and being able to do that, to be able to stay down there, and be able to kind of take control of what we're doing. So that's kind of what Smuggler's about. And that's kind of very strong. The branding's really nice for it. So it's kind of directly on brand with loads of places in Cornwall, but also in Germany, from the whole Rosenpilcher kind of Poldark thing. So, yeah, I would say that's that kind of stuff. I think I'm going off topic a little bit.
No,
so.
no, so yes.
a lot of you seem to be, well, you're saying that you start with the theme and then move onwards. Yesterday we heard another designer talk about how he starts with the mechanics. Do you ever start with them first rather than go with the theme?
I think it's
Not
probably
really.
going to be a no for you.
No.
Isn't it?
No. I mean, you can. There are millions of threads on BGG about people saying which is better, theme or mechanics first. It's a personal thing. I don't have the sort of the more analytical mind, which would be able to take something a little bit more sort of mathematical and turn that into something gamey. I need to love the thing that I'm working on. If I'm not interested, I'm reading all the John Wyndham's books at the moment, so I'm desperately thinking of how I can do a Day of the Triffids game, or how I can do a Kraken Wakes. Yeah, and it's just it's what I love to do.
Right. So you mechanics or theme?
Yeah, okay, so this is, I've heard the same argument a lot. So the guy who does Looney Labs, who makes the Flux game, he kind of says this quite famously as well. And it's not just one or the other. There's a seed, there's definitely a spark. So from a mechanics side, my background is more maths kind of based. So there's loads of really kind of cute, kind of asymmetrical kind of equations that happen in maths which can be abstracted out into games. And that's kind of where... So when we were thinking about the clangers thing, I was like, oh yeah, graph theory. And that's kind of that kind of side of things. But it's not just one thing or the other. There's a seed, definitely, but it's a cycle. And it has to be a cycle because it has to feed back into itself. And then at some point that will spit out.
Yeah, there's a lovely Facebook group, which is about indie game designers, and there's card and board game designers Facebook group. And a few months ago there was a thread saying, I've got this great game, but it's about the Holocaust. So should we do it? Should we come up with a different theme that kind of fits the mechanics? So he had this vision, and he was saying, can anyone suggest a new theme for this game that's about the Holocaust? And about 3/4 of us who responded said, no, do a game about the Holocaust. That was the game that inspired the mechanic, and that's what you started with. Yes, it will be controversial, but if you're coming from it sincerely, stick by it and go with that. And then the other third was saying, oh, no, you couldn't possibly do that. And I think they're probably wrong in my opinion, because I think there's nothing that should be taboo, as long as it's done appropriately. And Brenda Brathwaite did a fantastic game, which is called The Train, which has... she only ever does it as an exhibition, as a presentation. You can't buy this game, you go along and she runs it for you. And there's all these people trying to get counters onto a train to get them to a destination. And at the end, when you get somebody there, finally, you get revealed the fact that actually what you're doing is delivering them to Auschwitz, Auschwitz. And then, what do? Do you then try to go back and sabotage everybody else, or do you say, look, I'm being really efficient, aren't I great? And actually, I'm giving it away a little bit, but there's lots of interviews and discussions about that game, The Train. Suddenly you realise that I've been caught up with this idea of this engine of I do that and then do that and then do that, and I get this lovely path of pieces going to the end destination. Personally, I do sometimes get games that are just come from, I want to play with a mechanic, or I set that as an example for my students. There's a really nice book by Brenda Brathwaite and Ian Schreiber called Challenges for Game Designers, which is aimed to try and get video game designers looking at designing board and card games and paper prototypes first to get their systemic thinking going along. So it's Challenges for Game Designers by Schreiber and Brathwaite. It's quite a good game, quite a good book. I don't get any royalties. But what I would say is when I am approaching things from a mechanic, it usually ends up being a very simple game. And you have to then work to put depth and emergent kind of gameplay into it. Because often when you start off with just a mechanic, that's really, you kind of do limit yourself a little bit. So I'm kind of slightly more in the theme camp, but you can do it from a mechanic point of view. And obviously, these guys are much more experienced at actually commercial games than me. I kind of shove things up on my blog or on Board Game Geek. But there's a lot of resources on Board Game Geek as well. They have competitions usually every few weeks or months. A 2-player game that involves 10 cards and 5 counters. Go away and do it.
Has anyone here designed a micro game, one of these 18-card games? That's fantastic fun to have a go at one of those.
Are you aware of micro games like Love Letter?
Love Letter and stuff. They don't have to be deduction games. If anyone played Sail to India, there's a superb micro game, 21 cards and a few wooden cubes. It's the most monstrous Eurogame I've ever played, but it comes in a tiny, tiny box.
Wow.
Absolute genius.
Yeah.
That's a really good exercise to set yourself. What can I do?
Yeah.
My 18 card was completely stupid. It's about old ladies that beat each other up, and that was all it was about. But you know, you can be as serious or as frivolous as you like. But
Absolutely.
it's a fun challenge, isn't it, to constrain yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, design a game that is just a pack of cards. There are game companies that produce games that are just a pack of cards. That's what they do. I think there's one particularly German one, I can't remember the name off the top of my
Adlungsspiele.
head. Oh, thank you very much, Adlungsspiele.
66 cards, Adlungsspiele.
Yeah, so you can design games that are a pack of cards. And the good thing about that is lots of bespoke printers that will print you bespoke packs of cards. So all you do is just say, don't worry about the ace of spades and all that stuff. Here's 54 cards. And you can actually, so go away and think, how can I design a game that just uses 54 cards? So that's an option for you. So set yourself challenges, yeah.
For somebody like me, it's all slowly getting there on paper, so I'm cutting out my cards, we keep replaying where we've got to, and I'm doing the mechanics because you find something doesn't work, so you go back and see how that works. But on the design point, if I just have all that on paper in squares, I have no drawing ability, no design ability.
Okay.
How can I make that, when I get to a point where I can start sending it to friends to play test, as you say, to look good? I'm not convinced my very basic paper looks quite good enough. What would you recommend?
You're probably right. It isn't good enough.
No.
So two approaches, I think. One which would be to learn how to do it, and that's the thing you can learn.
And that's in design, you recommend?
Well,
I use PowerPoint.
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
my students use PowerPoint. You can just position things, you print them off, cut them
It just
out.
needs to be card-shaped, or it needs to be square to be a tile. And
If you want-
Staples do fantastic A4 size sticky labels.
Yeah.
They are your best friend.
Yeah. One option is you get the little card sleeves. There's lots of shops out there that sell card sleeves, little plastic transparent sleeves. And you can put a back and a front in together, thin paper on your own printer from home. And that makes a reasonably good representation of a card.
Right.
But clip art's a good example. Getting an artist who's interested as well, just finding somebody who's artistic and saying, would you like to do something to help me with my game? Because Stackbots is a nice example. Tom is a friend of mine, he's a designer out, and I think he's in the Power Suite there. You can demonstrate in the game. And that game, he did all the art himself, and it's really stickmen robots. Very, very simple. Very strong colours, you know, red,
It's cute
green,
as hell,
yellow.
though, it really
it's cute
is.
as hell.
Yeah.
Very, very simple graphic. Anybody could do graphics at that level. So it's just about the yes question.
About 15 minutes ago, you mentioned a design tool. I didn't quite catch the name of it.
sorry, no, this is InDesign again, so I'm just going to stop talking about InDesign because I think it's
It's called Adobe InDesign.
Yeah.
so yeah, so it's yeah, I really like it. I think it's really cool, and yeah, that kind of thing. The other thing I was going to say to you is to just find a friend, to just kind of use your enthusiasm for the game to just talk to people, and at some point that will get some traction, and yeah, that could work.
Yeah, because I think the board has got to visually look the best. When I'm here looking around these amazing boards, that's what immediately draws you in. Because the cards are a bit more practical, but sort of getting a lovely design for the board.
You can and must kind of sketch out a design, but then it's about finding somebody. DeviantArt is a good option. There's a website where you can put something up and say, can anyone do this as a job for me? And you will get people, as long as they can put it up on their showcase to show that they've done it, you can get people who might do that.
Do you know some of the things you could use actually? I mean, things like Fiverr, which would be like a really, really super cost-effective way, which might be kind of like a different approach that could work. Fiverr. So it's a website where people just do things with Fiverr.
Oh,
And you just say, look,
wow.
Yeah.
I need some art. And it's not like kind of within the art world, within the theatre world especially, people get a really bad deal in terms of the gigs. And game design, well, not game design, but the games industry, I think, kind of has a little bit of a bad rep for this. So with translators, with people just doing things for free, with demoing this kind of stuff, it's not necessarily kind of the coolest way to go about things. So as long as you're kind of upfront with people and you're not expecting to get everything for like a $5, you're able to get someone to give you like half an hour of their time for a $5, and that's kind of like, that's about right.
It could be what they call a vertical slice, so maybe one or two cards that are designed to give the idea of the feel, and that wouldn't take that long, and the rest of the cards could be insert picture of here. You know, as long as you've got something that represents the quality, obviously better the more, but you can get away with that.
I would be wary of going completely in the opposite direction as well, and commissioning hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of original art. There is the famous story of the guys who'd had John Avon do all the artwork for their cards. turned up and said, went to something, I think it was Fantasy Flight, and said, right, there it is, there's the art, there's the game, and they went, we don't like the art, we don't like the game, goodbye, and they spent, but we spent $1 million on this. So what?
Yeah.
So what? You could have bought a house for that. Bye.
I'm in the process of designing this is actually one of my first kind of commercial things, a set of dice, 8 dice for choreographers, so you can kind of roll dice, and it's called Roll and Move. Thank you.
What part of dice then?
Well, you kind of roll the dice, and each dice has a different position of the hand, or the arm, or the leg, and then they have to kind of put together movements from that. And the conservative estimate for the artwork is going to be about £1,000. So the issue is, when and where can I get hold of £1,000 to do it? So I'm applying for Arts Council grants to do this, because it's not going to be a game that's commercially successful. If you get a die printed, if you get a bespoke die done, that's £6 for a die if you get each face etched properly. So that's going to be like 40 quid for a set. Obviously in bulk you could get it a lot cheaper than that, but in theory it's going to be a very small number of very expensive things. So, and that's about right for the graphic artist that I've worked with before, for me to have exclusive rights to that art. And he said you might do it for about 700 quid because he's never designed a die before. So that for him is a new thing. So sometimes you find a good artist and say, could you give it have you ever done work in games before? Because if you've not done work in games, maybe, it might be a new, interesting thing for you, get something out of it. So sometimes you can negotiate that. But otherwise, free clip art. So, other questions?
On the marketing side, at what point would you start thinking of marketing? Is it like sort of straight away, or do you try and, when in the process is that first introduced the thought? And how early as well do you pin down your target audience?
I would say probably after the first 100 hours or so. I would say that's about right. And then then once I'm starting thinking about marketing, that's part of the process. Because it has to be everything altogether. Game design isn't just one thing; it's everything. In terms of target audience, I would say that's kind of at the same time. I would say.
I would treat target audience and marketing completely differently. When I'm not going to just. I try and think who I'm designing the game for when I'm putting the thing together at the start. So I'm designing a family game. What I don't want is 3 stages of resource conversion and complex VP rules and a mix of 7 different sort of Stefan Feld-like point salad approaches. I want it to be a family game. So I need to understand my audience when I'm starting out. Marketing, I don't think anything about that until my little meter has gone on to the sort of yes mark and I'm happy for it to be produced. It might be another couple of years before it's physically produced. So I don't really think about the marketing until I've actually got something to market, if you like. But that's just my approach. I'm not running Surprise Dare to become Mayfair Games. I've got 5 kids, a house to pay for, and I've got to do a real job. So I don't have the time to devote to making it into the world's biggest business. I do it because I love board games, and I want people to play my board games because I think they're quite good. Some people tell me then they're not, and that's fine. And just go on to the next one.
Can't make everyone happy. I avoid the thing completely because I give all my games away for free on my blog. So print and play, which is a complete cop-out on my part.
No,
but the thing is, it shouldn't necessarily be a commercial thing that you're aiming to do. It should be something that you're wanting to do for you. And it might be some of them are good enough to get made into games. It might be that they're not. But if you're saying, I want to become a game designer to become Ryan Knitzer and to earn a fortune and to have to give up my job.
Do you want to quote the famous quote about how to make a small fortune in board games?
Start with a big fortune.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, very, very last minute questions. Last question, time for one question before we finish. Okay. Well, get out there, make games, keep notes, throw nothing away. Oh, quickly, Christian.
Right. Can you tell us your blog?
My blog, drmikeready.com. So it's REDDY. Oh, Dr. Mike Ready.
Every man needs a shed on Board Game Geek.
Yeah. Okay, nice. So, make loads of games, and hopefully one year we'll come back and you'll be demonstrating a game in the trade hall and you'll be able to say, we all started here in this thing. So big thanks to our guests here. And a big thanks to you.